Philippians 4:13 might be the most quoted verse in the English-speaking world, and the least read in context. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It appears on coffee mugs, weightlifting belts, resumes, and locker room walls. Athletes point to the sky after a touchdown and cite it. Entrepreneurs frame it above their desks. It has become, in popular Christian culture, a blank check, a promise that God will fuel any ambition you bring to the table. But here is the problem. Paul did not write that sentence in a boardroom, a gym, or a victory speech. He wrote it from imprisonment, traditionally associated with Rome, though the precise location remains debated. He was not celebrating a win. He was explaining how he had learned to survive without enough food. The Greek verb behind I can do does not point toward achievement at all. It points somewhere else, and when you follow it, the entire verse rearranges itself. This is not a small shift in emphasis. It is a different claim altogether, and the passage Paul actually wrote may be far more useful and far more demanding than the one most people have memorized. To understand what Paul meant, you have to do one thing almost nobody does with this verse. Read the paragraph around it. Philippians 4:13 does not stand alone. It is the conclusion of an argument that begins in verse 10 and runs through verse 20. Here is the section that immediately precedes it, starting at verse 11. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Read in sequence. The logic is plain. Paul is not listing things he can accomplish. He is listing conditions he can withstand. He names them in pairs: brought low and abounding, plenty and hunger, abundance and need. Each pair is a polarity, opposite ends of the same human experience, and his claim is not that he can escape either pole, but that he has learned to stand inside both without being broken. The verse is the capstone of that argument. All things does not mean anything I decide to pursue. It means all these conditions I have just described. And the occasion matters. Paul is writing this letter to the church in Philippi from confinement, most likely in Rome, awaiting trial. He is chained. His future is uncertain. He does not know whether his case will end in release or execution. He mentions both possibilities earlier in the letter in chapter 1 with striking calm. He is also responding to a specific situation. The Philippians had sent him a financial gift through a man named a gift to help him survive in custody. Paul is grateful, but he is careful. He does not want them to think he is desperate, and he does not want them to think his faith depends on their generosity. So he frames his thank you inside a larger argument about what really sustains him. That argument is where verse 13 lives. Pull it out and you lose the entire foundation beneath it. The English phrase, I can do all things, translates 4 Greek words, but the weight of the sentence falls on one verb. Does not primarily mean to accomplish or to achieve. It means to have strength, capacity, or ability. The verb alone does not tell us what Paul has strength for. The surrounding paragraph does: being brought low and abounding, facing plenty and hunger, living with abundance and need. In Mark 5:4, the same verb describes a man so overpowered by spiritual torment that no one had the strength to subdue him. In Mark 14:37, Jesus asked Peter could you not stay awake 1 hour? The strength in question is the ability to hold on, to remain, to not collapse under pressure. When Paul writes, he is not saying, I can accomplish all my goals. He is saying something closer to, I have strength for all of it, all the deprivation, all the uncertainty, all the loss, and all the abundance too, which, as Paul understood, carries its own spiritual danger. The word translated as strengthens is equally important. Comes from to put power into someone, to infuse with capacity from the inside. Paul does not say he has developed this strength on his own. The grammar makes the direction unmistakable. The power moves from Christ into Paul, not from Paul's willpower outward into the world. So, the verse, read with its Greek vocabulary intact, says something like, I have strength to face every condition, because the one who keeps pouring power into me is Christ. That is a radically different sentence from the one on the coffee mug. There is another layer here that a modern reader would not automatically recognize. When Paul uses the word, translated content, in verse 11, he reaches for a term associated with the wider Greco-Roman ideal of self-sufficiency and especially important in philosophical traditions such as Stoicism. It described the capacity to remain steady without being controlled by external circumstances. But Paul gives the idea a distinctly Christian center. His stability is not presented as independence from everyone and everything. It is sustained by the one who strengthens him. Paul picks up that word, but he redirects it. His contentment does not come from within himself. It comes from Christ. He is using the Stoics' own vocabulary to make a claim they would have found strange, that true sufficiency is not independence from need, but dependence on someone beyond yourself. This matters because Philippi was a Roman colony. Its citizens were steeped in Roman values, honor, status, self-reliance, strength. The Christians would have heard and recognized it immediately, and they would have noticed that Paul was filling the word with a different source of power. Meanwhile, Paul's physical circumstances gave the word weight. He was not teaching contentment from a comfortable study. He was demonstrating it from a cell. His food was inconsistent. His legal future was unresolved. His body was confined. And in the middle of that, he wrote one of the most joyful letters in the New Testament, a letter in which the word joy and its relatives appear 16 times. That is the setting in which I can do all things was written, not triumph, not expansion, captivity, uncertainty, and an inexplicable steadiness in the middle of both. Paul's argument in Philippians 4 is not isolated. The same pattern, strength through endurance rather than achievement, runs through several of his letters. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes a persistent affliction he calls a thorn in the flesh. He asked God 3 times to remove it. God's answer was not removal. It was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul's conclusion mirrors Philippians 4:13 from a different angle. When I am weak, then I am strong. The strength he describes is not the ability to conquer the problem. It is the ability to carry it without being destroyed. In 2 Corinthians 11, Paul lists his credentials, but not the ones you would expect. He catalogs shipwrecks, beatings, hunger, sleepless nights, danger from rivers and bandits and false brothers. His proof of apostleship is not a list of victories. It is a list of things he survived. In Romans 8, the famous declaration that nothing can separate us from the love of God is preceded by a quotation from Psalm 44. For your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. The promise is not that believers will avoid slaughter. It is that even slaughter cannot separate them from Christ. The pattern is consistent. Paul's theology of strength is a theology of endurance. The power of God, in his experience, does not typically remove the obstacle. It sustains the person inside the obstacle. Now, a fair question. Is the popular reading entirely wrong? Not entirely. The Greek word, all things, is broad. And Paul is a man of enormous drive. He traveled thousands of miles, argued before magistrates, and carried the weight of every church he founded. It would be dishonest to pretend that Paul was passive. But context controls meaning, and in Philippians 4 is not left open. Paul has just told you what all things refers to: being brought low, abounding, hunger, plenty, abundance, need. The all is specific. It is not an invitation to insert your own ambitions. Some interpreters also note that the broader letter includes Paul's language about pressing forward and straining toward a goal, the athletic imagery in Philippians 3:13-14. That is true, but the goal Paul describes there is not career success or personal achievement. It is resurrection and full knowledge of Christ. The striving is spiritual, and the finish line is eschatological. It arrives at the end of all things, not at the end of a business quarter. There is also a textual detail worth noting. Some later and majority Greek manuscripts explicitly add the word Christ after the one who strengthens me, which is reflected in the King James Version. Several early and highly regarded manuscripts preserve the shorter reading, through the one who strengthens me. Modern critical editions generally prefer that shorter form. The surrounding letter still makes the source of Paul's strength clear, but the manuscript difference should be described as a textual variant, not as a hidden change in the verse. If this kind of investigation helps you read familiar passages with sharper eyes, take a moment to subscribe. Leaving a comment about what surprised you also helps more people find this work, and it keeps these studies going. So here is what changes when you read Philippians 4:13 the way Paul wrote it. The popular version says, God will empower you to do whatever you set out to do. The text says, God will give you the strength to endure whatever you are asked to face. The popular version is about expansion, more success, more ability, more results. The text is about stability, remaining whole when circumstances try to pull you apart. The popular version places you at the center, your goals, your dreams, your vision. The text places Christ at the center, His power, His sustaining presence, His sufficiency in your insufficiency. And here is what may be the sharpest difference. The popular version implies that hardship is a temporary obstacle on the way to breakthrough. Paul treats hardship as the normal landscape of faithfulness, the terrain where Christ's power becomes most visible. This does not make the verse smaller. It makes it heavier. A promise that God will help you win a contract is nice. A promise that God will hold you together when you lose everything. Your freedom, your safety, your certainty about tomorrow. That is a different category of promise. It costs more, and it holds in places where the popular version quietly falls apart. Consider what happens when someone builds their faith on the popular reading. They pray for a promotion and get it, and they credit God. Good. But then they pray for healing and do not receive it. They pray for a relationship and it falls apart. They pray for a child, and the answer is silence. And the verse that was supposed to sustain them now accuses them. If I can do all things and I failed, maybe I did not believe hard enough. Maybe God is not as close as I thought. Maybe the promise is not for me. That collapse does not happen because the verse is untrue. It happens because the verse was never saying what they were told it said. The promise was never about outcomes. It was about capacity, the capacity to remain faithful, to keep standing, to not be swallowed by either deprivation or abundance. Paul wrote this sentence knowing he might die. He was not confessing a desired outcome. He was describing a present reality. I am in a cell. I do not know what tomorrow holds. I sometimes do not have enough food. And I am all right. Not because my circumstances are all right, but because the one who holds me is stronger than my circumstances. That is a promise that works in a hospital room. It works after a divorce. It works in a season where nothing is producing results, where the silence is long, where the only honest prayer is, I do not know how much longer I can carry this. Paul's answer to that prayer is not, you will carry it because you are strong. His answer is, you will be carried because the one who pours strength into you has not stopped and will not stop and does not depend on your circumstances to keep his promise. The next time you see Philippians 4:13 on a wall, read the verse before it. Read the paragraph. Read the room. A prison cell somewhere in the Roman world. A man in chains. A thank you letter written not from victory, but from endurance. I can do all things was never a war cry for personal conquest. It was the quiet testimony of a man who had been emptied of every external support and found that something still held him upright. Not his talent, not his willpower, not his circumstances. Someone. And that someone had not moved. Subscribe for more investigations into the original language, history, and context behind Scripture's most familiar passages.